Ego is the enemy. This video is based on key insights from the book Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. Chapter 1, Talk, Talk, Talk. Ryan Holiday explores how easily we fall into the trap of talking about what we'll do instead of actually doing it, and how this habit holds us back from achieving our goals. He begins by sharing the story of Upton Sinclair, a writer who published a book before becoming governor, detailing his future successes as if they'd already happened. This backfired, as Sinclair seemed to lose the drive to actually win the election, having already lived it out in his mind. Holiday argues this illustrates a common problem. We get satisfaction from talking about success, mistaking it for actual progress. The author points out how modern technology encourages this behavior. Social media platforms constantly ask us to share our thoughts and experiences, often presenting a polished, positive version of reality. This creates a cycle where we seek external validation instead of focusing on internal growth. Holiday describes this as our ego wanting attention for minimal effort. He uses the example of Emily Good, a writer who spent years online building her brand instead of writing her novel, finding it easier to talk about being a writer than to actually write. Holiday emphasizes that real progress requires difficult work, and talking about it doesn't make it any easier. He contrasts this with silence, arguing that it's a sign of strength and confidence. He cites historical figures like General Sherman, who deliberately delayed forming opinions, and Bo Jackson, who kept his athletic goals secret, to demonstrate the power of strategic silence. Keeping quiet allows for flexibility and avoids premature commitment to ideas that might not be the best. The author explains that talking depletes our energy, confusing mental visualization with actual accomplishment. Research suggests that excessive verbalization can hinder problem-solving and creativity. The more challenging a task, the more important it is to avoid getting caught up in talk, as it distracts from the effort needed to overcome resistance, the internal obstacles that prevent us from creating. Holiday suggests that talking feels like progress, but it's often just a way to avoid the discomfort of real work. Holiday uses Marlon Brando's quote about the terror of void to explain why we talk so much. Facing silence and uncertainty is scary, especially when our ego has convinced us that we need constant validation. However, he argues that great work comes from confronting this void, not filling it with noise. True voices of influence don't announce themselves, they let their work speak for itself. They focus on the work, not the recognition. Ultimately, Holiday concludes that work and chatter are enemies. He encourages readers to resist the urge to seek praise before achieving results, to plug the hole that drains their energy, and to focus on the task at hand. By prioritizing action over talk, individuals can unlock their potential and achieve meaningful success. Chapter 2, To Be or to Do. Ryan Holiday presents a powerful idea about living a meaningful life, inspired by the story of John Boyd, a brilliant but largely unknown military strategist. Boyd's life wasn't about climbing the ladder of success, but about doing something important, even if it meant sacrificing personal gain. Holiday explains that many people face a choice: to be somebody, to gain status, promotions, and approval, or to do something, to focus on meaningful work and contribute to something larger than themselves. The author suggests that our egos often push us towards the first option, seeking validation and rewards. The author illustrates how easily we can get sidetracked from our original goals. Things like wanting a better job title, a bigger paycheck, or more recognition can pull us away from what truly matters. Holiday points out that appearances can be deceiving. Having a fancy title doesn't mean you're actually making a difference. He uses the example of Boyd, who remained a colonel despite revolutionizing military strategy, choosing impact over prestige. This demonstrates that true accomplishment isn't always measured by external rewards. Holiday emphasizes that ego can corrupt our values. He shares Boyd's exercise of replacing positive ideals like duty, honor, country with pride, power, greed, to show how easily systems can encourage selfish behavior. The author explains that when we focus on what we want, we're more likely to compromise our principles. Instead, Holiday suggests focusing on a purpose bigger than ourselves. The author uses Frederick Douglass's observation that a nation dies Epicurean to show how easily positive values can turn sour when self-interest takes over. Holiday argues that having a clear purpose makes the choice between being and doing easier. If your goal is to make a real impact, distractions like status and recognition will lose their appeal. It's about the work itself, not the praise. Holiday highlights that choosing to do isn't always easy. Every opportunity must be evaluated. Does it help me achieve my purpose? Am I being selfless? It requires discipline and a willingness to resist temptations. Boyd's life serves as a powerful example. He lived modestly, even refusing potential bribes, and was largely forgotten by the military establishment despite his significant contributions. Ultimately, Holiday encourages readers to constantly examine their motivations. Are they driven by ego or by a genuine desire to make a difference? He challenges us to ask ourselves what we want to accomplish in life, not just who we want to be. The author concludes by reminding us that life is a continuous roll call, presenting us with constant choices between self-promotion and meaningful action. Chapter 3, Become a Student. Ryan Holiday begins by sharing the story of Kirk Hammett, a guitarist who joined the famous band Metallica. Even after achieving his dream, Hammett realized he still needed to improve. He wasn't satisfied and sought out lessons from Joe Satriani, a highly respected guitar teacher, showing that even when you reach success, staying a student is vital. This illustrates a key idea. True mastery requires constant learning and a willingness to admit you don't know everything. Holiday explains that letting go of ego is tough because people dislike admitting weakness or having a lot to learn. We often want to feel ready and capable, but this mindset can actually hold us back. The author suggests that honestly evaluating your skills, even if it means seeing them as less impressive than you thought, is a crucial step toward growth. Pretending to know everything stops you from actually getting better. Satriani's teaching style was strict, and many students couldn't handle it. However, Hammett thrived because he was willing to endure tough criticism. This highlights the importance of seeking out mentors or teachers who will challenge you, even if it's uncomfortable. Holiday points out that a good education can't be rushed. It requires consistent effort and a willingness to be corrected. The author introduces Frank Shamrock's plus, minus, and equal system for fighters. This means surrounding yourself with people better than you to learn from, people less skilled to teach, and peers to challenge you. This system provides constant feedback, removing ego and encouraging humility. Shamrock believed that a student mindset is essential for martial arts and for life. Holiday emphasizes that the need for a student mindset isn't limited to music or fighting. Scientists, philosophers, writers, and even politicians benefit from continuous learning and mentorship. To stay great, they must understand the past, present, and future of their field. It's about always being open to new information and perspectives. The author warns against the temptation to become complacent after achieving success. Had Hammett believed he was already good enough, he might have faded into obscurity. A true student is like a sponge, absorbing knowledge and constantly seeking improvement. Self-awareness and self-criticism are key, especially in competitive fields where opponents will exploit weaknesses. Holiday references the ancient philosopher Epictetus, who said you can't learn what you think you already know. This means being open to new ideas and challenging your own beliefs. Taking and actively seeking harsh feedback is vital, even when it's unpleasant. Ego avoids criticism, but growth requires it. The author notes that access to education is easier than ever before, with countless resources available online and through affordable courses. There's no excuse for stopping the learning process. Teachers aren't always formal instructors. They can be anyone who inspires or challenges you, even historical figures through their writings. However, ego can prevent us from recognizing and learning from these teachers. Holiday concludes with a proverb: when the student is ready, the teacher appears. suggesting that a genuine desire to learn attracts guidance. Chapter 4, Don't Be Passionate. Ryan Holiday argues that what many people believe is the key to success, passion, can actually hold them back. He points out that society constantly tells us to follow our passion, but history shows that great achievements often come from a calmer, more focused approach. He uses the example of Eleanor Roosevelt, who didn't see herself as passionate, but as purposeful and reasonable, and achieved incredible things. In contrast, figures like George W. Bush with the Iraq War or Christopher McCandless venturing into the wild were driven by intense passion that led to flawed decisions and negative outcomes. Holiday explains that this kind of passion isn't simply caring about something. It's an overwhelming enthusiasm that clouds judgment. It's like being so excited about an idea that you ignore potential problems or what others think. He compares it to being a zealot, someone who is so convinced they're right that they become unreasonable. He illustrates this with the story of the Segway, a product inventors passionately believed in, but ultimately failed because they misjudged the market. The author highlights the importance of discipline and control, using basketball coach John Wooden and player Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as examples. Wooden, a legendary coach, intentionally avoided rah-rah motivation, focusing instead on a system and consistent effort. Abdul-Jabbar described Wooden as dispassionate, meaning he wasn't ruled by emotion. This approach led to incredible success, demonstrating that steady, deliberate work is more effective than emotional highs. Holiday emphasizes that real-world problems aren't simple challenges to be overcome with courage, but complex obstacles that require careful thought and planning. He describes a common pattern. Someone gets a big idea, receives advice, but then ignores it, driven by their own enthusiasm and ultimately achieving little. He uses the example of Napoleon's disastrous invasion of Russia, a result of overconfidence and passion overriding sound strategy. The author suggests that passion often hides a weakness, substituting frantic energy for true strength and perseverance. He points out that people who are truly successful can articulate their goals and plans, but also demonstrate consistent progress. He contrasts this with those who are all talk and no action, caught in the passion paradox of being busy without achieving results. He uses the analogy of a dog chasing squirrels, full of energy, but rarely successful. Holiday proposes that purpose and realism are what we truly need. Purpose provides direction with boundaries, while realism grounds us in reality. He encourages readers to ask themselves practical questions. Where do I start? What's the first step? How will I measure progress? He quotes Goethe, stating that great passions are maladies without hope, and advocates for a deliberate, methodical approach. He suggests embracing a process of small steps, seeking feedback, and learning from mistakes. Ultimately, Ryan Holiday argues that focusing on what you must do, rather than what you want to do, is the path to lasting achievement. He encourages readers to leave passion to those who aren't serious about success, and to adopt a mindset of humility, careful planning, and consistent effort. He concludes by referencing Talleyrand's advice to diplomats, above all, not too much zeal, suggesting that a calm, measured approach is the key to doing great things. Chapter 5, Follow the Canvas Strategy. Ryan Holiday explores a surprising path to success, putting your ego aside and helping others shine. He begins with the story of Martial, a Roman writer who felt unfairly stuck serving wealthy patrons, even though that very position gave him unique insights into Roman life. Martial's bitterness blinded him to the opportunity right in front of him. Holiday argues this is a common mistake, people wanting instant recognition instead of building a foundation. The author explains that many talented people struggle with entry-level tasks, feeling they are too good for them. They'd rather risk nothing than appear to be subservient. But Holiday points out that even giants like Michelangelo and Benjamin Franklin started by serving others. He suggests reframing this service not as kissing up, but as supporting others so they can do their best work. It's about clearing the path for those above you, which ultimately creates a path for yourself. Holiday stresses that, when you're starting out, it's important to be realistic. You're likely not as skilled or important as you believe, and your ideas might need refining. The best way to learn and grow is to attach yourself to successful people and organizations and contribute to their success. This means temporarily setting aside your own ambitions and focusing on their goals. It's a humbling experience, but it reduces ego and allows for maximum learning. The author uses Benjamin Franklin and Bill Belichick as examples. Franklin anonymously submitted articles to his brother's newspaper, letting his brother take the credit while he learned the ropes of publishing. Belichick volunteered for unglamorous film analysis, becoming an expert and earning respect through his results, not his status. Both men understood the power of supporting others. Belichick's father taught him to offer feedback privately and respectfully, avoiding conflict and building relationships. Holiday argues that focusing on others' success is a powerful strategy. Instead of demanding recognition, concentrate on helping others achieve their goals. Offer ideas, connect people, tackle unwanted tasks, and find ways to improve efficiency. This builds a reputation for being indispensable, creates valuable relationships, and generates goodwill. It's about trading short-term gratification for long-term benefits. The author encourages readers to think about how they can help everyone they meet. What can you do for them without expecting anything in return? This mindset, he believes, is endlessly scalable and effective at any stage of life. It's a strategy that doesn't diminish with age. Holiday concludes that those who clear the path ultimately control its direction, just as the canvas shapes the painting. By focusing on supporting others, you're subtly guiding the overall outcome and positioning yourself for future success. Chapter 6, Restrain Yourself. Ryan Holiday begins by highlighting a powerful idea. The most successful people are those who control themselves. He points to Booker T. Washington's observation that calmness, patience, and politeness are hallmarks of achievement. To illustrate this, Holiday tells the story of Jackie Robinson, a man who wasn't naturally known for restraint, yet became a groundbreaking figure in baseball. Before becoming a baseball legend, Robinson was a young man prone to reacting with anger when faced with unfair treatment. He got into fights, argued with authority, and even faced a court-martial for standing up to segregation. Holiday doesn't judge this. He acknowledges it's a natural response. However, he poses a crucial question. Are their goals worth enduring mistreatment to achieve? This is where the concept of restraint becomes vital. When Branch Rickey, the Dodgers manager, sought a player to break the color barrier, he wasn't looking for just talent. He needed someone who could resist the urge to retaliate. Rickey deliberately tested Robinson, simulating the abuse he would likely face, and Robinson proved he could handle it. This wasn't about accepting injustice, but about recognizing a larger purpose. Robinson understood that losing control would derail the entire integration effort. Throughout his career, Robinson faced relentless hostility, physical attacks, racial slurs, unfair calls. Yet he maintained his composure, never resorting to violence. Holiday contrasts this with the behavior of other players, like Ted Williams, who could afford to be impulsive because of their established position. For Robinson, any outburst would have been catastrophic. He had to swallow his pride and endure insults, even going so far as to pose for a photo with his tormentor to protect his career and the bigger cause. Holiday emphasizes that everyone, regardless of talent or success, will encounter unfairness and obstacles. The key isn't to avoid these challenges, but to manage your reaction to them. He uses the example of a Dutch fighter who writes, "Relax on his hands before a fight," recognizing that anger hinders performance. Losing your temper is a distraction from your goals. The author explains that ego often fuels the desire to immediately correct perceived wrongs, to prove your worth to others. But Holiday argues that this is counterproductive. Instead, he suggests absorbing the negativity, working harder, and letting success speak for itself. It's about understanding that others' poor behavior reflects on them, not on you. Holiday points out that those establishing themselves often face abuse from those already in power. It's a difficult reality, but a necessary one. He suggests using this period to learn, grow, and build a foundation for future success. Robinson, once secure in his position, could then assert himself more freely. However, he always maintained a level of dignity and restraint, understanding the importance of his legacy. Ultimately, Holiday concludes that restraint isn't just a virtue. It's a strategic advantage on the path to achieving meaningful goals. Chapter 7, Get Out of Your Own Head. Ryan Holiday begins by explaining that constantly thinking about yourself can actually stop you from truly living. He points out that people lost in their own thoughts miss out on what's happening around them, creating a false reality. He uses famous characters like Holden Caulfield from The Catcher in the Rye, Arturo Bandini from Ask the Dust, and Binks Bolling from The Moviegoer as examples of people who couldn't escape their own heads, and how this impacted their lives and potential. Holiday notes that these authors' struggles weren't just in their books, but also in their real lives. Salinger, Fonte, and Percy all battled with self-doubt and a disconnect from the world, which affected their work and happiness. This leads Holiday to ask a powerful question: what if they had found a way to overcome these issues earlier? He then broadens the scope, explaining that this problem isn't new. Plato talked about people who preferred daydreaming to actually working towards their goals over 2,000 years ago. To illustrate the dangers of a runaway ego, Holiday introduces General George McClellan, a highly qualified Civil War leader who failed spectacularly. McClellan was so focused on his own image and his perfect plan that he couldn't actually lead his troops into battle. He imagined enemies that weren't there and overestimated his own successes, ultimately costing lives. Holiday emphasizes that ego isn't the same as confidence. It can actually prevent action and clear thinking. Holiday then brings in Anne Lamott's description of the station KFKD in our heads, a constant stream of self-praise and self-criticism. He explains that ambition can make this inner voice even louder, especially in a world that encourages us to build a personal brand. It's easy to get lost in the story we tell ourselves, forgetting the difference between fantasy and reality. This self-obsession can paralyze us or distort our judgment, like McClellan misinterpreting intelligence reports. Holiday points out that everyone struggles with these tendencies, comparing it to the teenage experience of feeling like everyone is watching and judging you. He explains that we often create a movie in our heads, imagining ourselves as heroes, instead of simply participating in life. This is ego at work. However, Holiday offers a solution. Successful people learn to quiet this inner noise. He uses General George C. Marshall as an example, explaining that Marshall refused to keep a diary during World War II because he feared it would turn his decision-making into a performance for future readers. Marshall understood that focusing on his reputation would cloud his judgment. Holiday concludes by urging readers to embrace the present moment and the tangible world, even when it's uncomfortable. He encourages people to focus on the work itself, the lessons to be learned, and to let go of the need to impress others. Ultimately, he argues that a clear and present mind is essential for creativity, awareness, and a fulfilling life. Chapter 8, The Danger of Early Pride. Ryan Holiday explores the sneaky danger of feeling too good about yourself too soon, arguing that early pride can actually hold you back from achieving your full potential. He begins with the story of a young Benjamin Franklin, puffed up with success, literally walking into a ceiling beam, a humbling moment pointed out by Cotton Mather. This incident serves as a metaphor. When you're too focused on how great you are, you miss the obstacles ahead. Holiday explains that pride isn't just about being boastful. It's a sneaky lie that makes you think you're better than you actually are. This isn't just a religious idea, he notes, but a practical one. Pride makes it harder to learn, to improve, and to connect with others. It's like wearing blinders, preventing you from seeing your weaknesses and the reality of a situation. History is full of examples, from ancient poets to business leaders, warning about the downfall that comes with early success and a big ego. The author illustrates how pride distorts your thinking. It turns small wins into huge accomplishments and makes you believe you're destined for greatness without putting in the necessary work. For example, someone might think, I started my own business, so I'm an entrepreneur, instead of recognizing the hard work and learning still required. This inflated sense of self can lead to bad decisions and ultimately failure. Holiday emphasizes that true confidence comes from consistent effort, not empty boasts. To combat this, Holiday points to John D. Rockefeller's practice of nightly self-reflection. Rockefeller regularly questioned himself, asking if success was going to his head. He understood that even small achievements could breed arrogance, and he actively worked to stay grounded. This self-awareness is key. Holiday suggests asking yourself, what am I missing because of my pride? And what am I avoiding by acting so confident? Facing these questions honestly, especially when the stakes are low, can prevent bigger problems later on. Holiday clarifies that humility isn't about thinking less of yourself, but about being realistic. Pride can be internal, too, secretly believing you're superior to others. He quotes Montaigne, who warned that whatever you're most proud of will likely be your downfall. The author encourages readers to surround themselves with people who are still striving, still learning, rather than those who have already made it. Ultimately, Holiday argues that focusing on the journey, on continuous improvement, is far more valuable than basking in temporary success. He uses the example of Benjamin Franklin, who spent his life battling his ego and, as a result, achieved remarkable things. The message is clear: ditch the boasting, stay humble, and keep working. It's not about waiting until you deserve to be proud. It's about recognizing that pride itself offers nothing of value. Chapter 9: Work, Work, Work. Ryan Holiday begins by explaining that good ideas are useless without hard work. He uses the example of Edgar Degas, a famous painter, who had lots of ideas for poems but never actually wrote any great ones. His friend, the poet Mallarme, pointed out that poems aren't made from ideas, but from the actual work of choosing the right words. This shows that simply thinking about doing something isn't enough. You have to put in the effort to make it happen. Holiday argues that the difference between someone who's truly good at something and someone who just pretends to be is whether they're willing to do the work. A real artist doesn't just have feelings, they create something that makes others feel something. It's about turning thoughts into a finished product, trading talking for doing. Henry Ford and sculptor Nina Holton both emphasize this point. A plan isn't valuable until it's built, and an idea doesn't become art until it's sculpted. Even successful entrepreneur Ben Horowitz admits the hardest part isn't dreaming big, but dealing with the tough realities when things go wrong. The author stresses that the amount of work needed is often underestimated. It's not about reaching a specific number of hours, like the often quoted 10,000 hours, but about consistent effort. This can be encouraging because it means success is possible for anyone willing to work hard, but it also means there's no quick fix or easy path. Holiday points out that our egos don't like this idea because they want credit for just having ideas, not for the actual work. He illustrates this with the story of Bill Clinton, who built a network of contacts by consistently reaching out to people, even before he needed their help. This dedication paid off when he became president. Similarly, Charles Darwin spent years quietly working on his theory of evolution, refining it until it was ready, even though no one was cheering him on. These examples show that real progress happens behind the scenes, through consistent effort. Holiday challenges readers to choose work over seeking quick praise. He uses the Latin phrase fac, si facis, do it if you're going to do it, to emphasize the importance of following through. He also highlights the idea that the quality of the work matters more than natural talent, using the Latin phrase materiam superbat opus. The workmanship was better than the material. He uses Bill Bradley's story, a basketball player who became a senator, to show how dedication leads to success. Holiday warns against the fake it till you make it mentality, arguing that it's better to actually become good at something than to pretend. He encourages readers to view work as an investment in themselves, a way to delay gratification and earn their goals. He emphasizes that true work involves pushing through difficulties and ignoring distractions, focusing on improvement rather than seeking approval. Ultimately, Holiday suggests that a person's dedication is visible in the results they achieve. You know a workman by the chips they leave. Chapter 10. For everything that comes next, ego is the enemy. Ryan Holiday begins by pointing out a tricky thing about wanting to succeed. We often think we need a big ego to get there. He uses a quote from Shakespeare, suggesting that being humble can actually help you climb the ladder to your goals. But many people worry that being humble will make them seem weak or unimportant. Holiday uses the example of General Sherman, a historical figure who didn't initially seem very successful. For a long time, he wasn't famous or wealthy. He could have gotten discouraged, but instead, he kept working on himself. This illustrates a common problem Holiday describes using the words of radio host Ira Glass. When you start something new, like a creative project, your skills usually don't match your vision. There's a gap between what you want to create and what you're actually able to create. It's tempting to cover up this gap with a show of confidence, but Holiday argues that true growth comes from honestly facing your weaknesses and working to improve. The author explains that giving in to ego is like taking a shortcut that will cause problems later. No one ever looks back and admires someone for having a huge ego. Instead, it's better to be patient and focus on becoming the best version of yourself. He uses the examples of athletes like Lance Armstrong and Barry Bonds, who cheated to win, to show how ego can lead to bad choices. They thought they needed an unfair advantage, but ultimately, their actions damaged their reputations. Holiday emphasizes that real ambition isn't about showing off or winning at all costs. It's about quietly believing in yourself and staying true to your values, even when it's hard. He suggests that choosing honesty and hard work can be a lonely path, but it's the only way to build lasting success. Sherman's quiet dedication prepared him for great responsibility when his country needed him. Ultimately, Holiday encourages readers to choose a different path, one where they are bold in their goals but humble in their approach. He warns that life will present challenges, and a strong ego will only get in the way. He concludes by stating that ego is a dangerous obstacle to true success, and readers should be prepared to face this challenge. Chapter 11, Always Stay a Student. Ryan Holiday begins by sharing a surprising truth about Genghis Khan. Most people think of him as a cruel leader, but Holiday argues he was actually a brilliant learner. Khan didn't just conquer lands. He studied the people he conquered, taking the best ideas from each culture to make his own empire stronger. He wasn't afraid to admit what he didn't know and constantly sought out experts to help him improve. This openness to learning was the key to his success. Holiday explains that this applies to everyone, not just historical figures. As we achieve things, we face new challenges that require new skills. A soldier needs to learn politics, a salesperson needs to learn management, and so on. It's a never-ending cycle of learning and adapting. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we don't know. A concept Holiday illustrates with a quote from physicist John Wheeler about the island of knowledge and the shore of ignorance. The author warns that success can be dangerous because it can lead to arrogance. When we think we already know everything, we stop learning and become stuck. This is where ego gets in the way. Ego makes us defensive and prevents us from seeing our weaknesses. Holiday uses the analogy of sirens luring sailors to their doom. Ego sings a tempting song that can lead to failure. He quotes Wynton Marsalis, who says humble people are always observing and listening, and therefore always improving. Holiday stresses that being a student isn't just for beginners, it's a lifelong commitment. We should learn from everyone, even those we dislike or those who have defeated us. He suggests deliberately seeking out discomfort by studying topics we know nothing about or putting ourselves in situations where we are the least knowledgeable person. This challenges our assumptions and forces us to grow. The author contrasts amateurs who are defensive about their knowledge with professionals who enjoy being challenged and humbled. He points out that many successful businesses fail because they stop learning and adapting. They become rigid and unable to respond to new trends, a concept known as disruption. This happens because they lose the student mindset. Finally, Holiday emphasizes that simply wanting to learn isn't enough. We need to understand how we learn best and create systems to support continuous education. Otherwise, we risk becoming ignorant despite our best intentions. He concludes with a powerful message: always stay a student, because the moment we stop learning, we start to decline. Chapter 12, What's Important to You? Ryan Holiday argues that people often create stories about their successes that aren't entirely true, and this habit can actually hold them back. He uses the example of Bill Walsh, the football coach who turned the 49ers into a winning team. It would have been easy for Walsh to claim he had a perfect plan all along, but he admitted it was more about setting high standards for everyone and seeing what happened. He focused on the small things, how players practiced, how coaches dressed, and believed that if those details were right, winning would follow. Holiday explains that wanting to believe in a neat story about our achievements is natural. We like to think successful people always knew what they were doing, and we want to believe we do too. But this can lead to arrogance and prevent us from continuing to work hard. Walsh understood this. He didn't let praise go to his head, and he kept pushing his team to improve. In fact, after their first Super Bowl win, the 49ers actually did worse, because the players started believing they were already great. They only got back on track when they focused on the basics again. The author points out that crafting a story about our success can be dangerous because it stops us from learning and growing. It's like putting a label on something and then refusing to look at it closely. We start to believe our own hype and forget what really made us successful in the first place. Holiday uses the example of Bernard Baruch, a famous investor who warned against people bragging about their investment skills. He suggests that true success is often messy and unpredictable, and trying to make it seem perfect in hindsight is dishonest. Holiday emphasizes that focusing on the process, the daily work, the small details is more important than having a grand vision. He uses examples like Google and YouTube, which didn't start with ambitious plans to change the world, but grew from simple ideas. He warns against letting ego take over, comparing it to Napoleon's downfall. Napoleon believed in his own destiny, which led him to make reckless decisions. Ultimately, Holiday encourages readers to avoid labels and focus on the work itself. Don't get caught up in thinking of yourself as a genius or a successful entrepreneur. Just keep doing what got you to where you are, and don't let pride get in the way of continued improvement. He believes that staying humble and focused on the fundamentals is the key to lasting success. It's about remembering you were there when it happened, and acknowledging the role of luck and hard work, rather than pretending you always knew what you were doing. Chapter 13, Don't Tell Yourself a Story. Ryan Holiday explores how our ego can actually hold us back from a truly fulfilling life, using the stories of Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman as examples. After winning the Civil War, both men were given the freedom to do anything they wanted. Sherman, happy with his accomplishments, chose a quiet life and found contentment. Grant, however, let his ego drive him to seek more the presidency, and despite being a good person, he struggled in politics and later fell victim to a financial scam because he wanted to be seen as successful as wealthy businessmen. Holiday argues that many of us start with a clear idea of what's important, but success can cloud our judgment. We begin comparing ourselves to others, wanting what they have, and chasing achievements that don't truly matter to us. This creates a never-ending cycle of wanting more, even when we already have enough. It's like running a race where everyone is running different courses, but we're all focused on beating each other instead of finishing our own. The author explains that ego fuels envy and makes us lose sight of our own goals. It makes us say yes to things we don't want just to impress others or avoid missing out. This constant striving for external validation prevents us from focusing on what truly brings us joy and purpose. Holiday introduces the Greek concept of euthymia, which means staying on your own path and not getting distracted by others. It's about being the best you can be, not trying to be better than everyone else. Holiday emphasizes the importance of knowing your own values and making choices that align with them. If you don't define what success means to you, you'll end up chasing someone else's definition. He uses the example of someone trying to be both an opera singer and a pop star. It's impossible to excel at both because they require different skills and commitments. Life requires trade-offs, but ego resists compromise. The author suggests that we need to ask ourselves why we do what we do. Understanding our motivations allows us to say no to things that don't serve our purpose and ignore the opinions of those who don't understand our goals. It takes courage to step back from chasing external validation and focus on what truly matters, but it's the key to finding lasting happiness and fulfillment. Holiday concludes that true independence comes from being content with what you have and pursuing your own path, rather than coveting what others possess. Chapter 14, Entitlement, Control, and Paranoia. Ryan Holiday begins by pointing out a surprising truth. Believing your work is incredibly important can be a sign you're heading for a breakdown. He illustrates this with the story of Xerxes, the ancient Persian emperor who literally punished a river for daring to damage his bridges. This extreme example shows how power can lead to believing you're above the rules, even the rules of nature. Xerxes also threatened a mountain, showing a ridiculous need to control everything around him. Holiday argues that success, while wonderful, can be dangerous. Achieving goals often requires a lot of confidence, even a bit of stubbornness. You have to believe in yourself and push through challenges. However, once you reach success, it's easy to start thinking you're invincible, smarter, and more important than everyone else. This is where entitlement, the need for control, and paranoia creep in. Ty Warner, the creator of Beanie Babies, thought he could sell anything with his brand on it, even manure. And his overconfidence led to the company's downfall. The author explains that the very qualities that helped someone succeed, persistence, courage, ignoring doubts, can become weaknesses if they aren't kept in check. It's human to feel powerful after overcoming obstacles, but believing you are powerful doesn't mean you actually control everything. This inflated sense of self can lead to hubris or excessive pride. Holiday uses the example of Benjamin Franklin wisely choosing not to send a harsh letter to a colleague, recognizing the importance of controlling one's own temper. Holiday highlights that the responsibilities that come with success can be stressful, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed. However, letting those feelings control you is a mistake. He points to Richard Nixon's Oval Office tapes as a chilling example of someone losing touch with reality, rejecting advice, and living in a bubble of his own making. General Winfield Scott showed wisdom by simply pitying a belligerent Jefferson Davis, understanding that arguing with someone consumed by their own ego is pointless. The author emphasizes that ego hurts everyone around you: family, friends, coworkers, and even customers. Napoleon, despite seeking applause, actually looked down on the people whose approval he craved. To avoid this trap, Holiday advises regularly reminding yourself of your limitations. Entitlement makes you undervalue others, control makes you fight unnecessary battles, and paranoia makes you distrust everyone. Holiday concludes by stating that constantly looking out for number one actually encourages others to work against you, seeing it as a sign of weakness. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where your fear of being undermined leads to others actually undermining you. He encourages readers to stop this cycle, questioning if this constant struggle is truly the freedom they envisioned when they pursued success in the first place. Chapter 15, Managing Yourself. Ryan Holiday begins by sharing a story about President Eisenhower. Even as the newly elected president, Eisenhower refused to receive sealed letters directly. He understood that his job wasn't to handle every single detail, but to lead and trust his team to filter information and manage tasks. This wasn't about being stuck up. It was about recognizing that a leader's time is best spent on the most important things, not getting bogged down in everything. Holiday explains that as people climb the ladder in their careers, the skills that help them succeed early on aren't always enough to keep them going. What worked when you were starting out like working extra hard to cover for disorganization, won't work when the stakes are higher. The author contrasts Eisenhower's approach with the story of John DeLorean, the carmaker. DeLorean believed that the rules and structure at General Motors were stifling creativity. He intentionally created a chaotic and unstructured company, thinking it would foster innovation. Instead, it led to mismanagement, corruption, and ultimately, the failure of his company. DeLorean was constantly distracted, couldn't delegate effectively, and surrounded himself with people who simply agreed with him. Holliday points out that DeLorean, despite being brilliant, couldn't manage himself, and that's why he couldn't manage his company. Holliday emphasizes that a leader's role shifts from doing the work to deciding what work needs to be done. This requires letting go of the need to be involved in every detail and trusting others to handle their responsibilities. It also means being honest with yourself about your strengths and weaknesses and recognizing that others might be better suited for certain tasks. It's a tough transition because many people enjoy being in the weeds, solving problems and feeling important. But a true leader focuses on the bigger picture. The author notes that there isn't one perfect system for managing things. Some organizations thrive with a lot of freedom, while others need strict rules. The key is to understand what your situation requires and create a system that supports your goals. However, Holliday warns against common pitfalls like micromanaging, getting distracted by shiny new ideas, or surrounding yourself with people who only tell you what you want to hear. These behaviors are often rooted in ego and prevent effective leadership. Holliday concludes by stating that taking responsibility means setting clear goals, enforcing standards, and focusing on results. Just as a leader's actions set the tone for an entire organization, a person's self-management impacts their own success. Ultimately, overcoming ego and embracing organization isn't about becoming a rigid rule follower. It's about recognizing that true leadership requires clarity, discipline, and a commitment to achieving meaningful outcomes. Chapter 16, The Disease of Me. Ryan Holiday explores a common trap that successful people fall into, letting their ego take over. He begins by contrasting the great Allied generals of World War II, highlighting George Marshall as an exceptional leader who avoided the pitfalls of self-importance that plagued others. While many generals focused on personal glory and protecting their positions, Marshall remained focused on the bigger picture, winning the war. Holiday introduces the idea of the disease of me, inspired by basketball coach Pat Riley's observation of winning teams. Initially, teams work well together, but success can breed selfishness. Players start thinking about their own stats, their own importance, and this can destroy the team's unity. This isn't limited to sports. It shows up in business, politics, and everyday life as people prioritize personal gain over collective goals. It's the feeling that your problems are unique and no one else understands. Marshall's story is presented as a powerful example of resisting this disease. He consistently turned down honors and promotions, not because he didn't want them, but because he didn't need them to feel validated. He understood that confidence doesn't require external praise, while ego does. He even declined command of the D-Day invasion, recognizing that Eisenhower was better suited for the role, despite the immense prestige it would have brought him. Holiday argues that this isn't about being a pushover, but about prioritizing the mission over personal ambition. The author explains that it's easier to be selfless early in one's career, but as success grows, the temptation to focus on getting what's mine becomes stronger. However, Holiday stresses that success doesn't give anyone the right to be greedy or selfish. He uses the story of a general who treated Marshall poorly, only for Marshall to later help him when he had the chance, demonstrating magnanimity, a quality of being generous and forgiving. Holiday points out that Marshall didn't even want to see a portrait painted of himself, showing his lack of concern for his image. He wasn't trying to be humble, he simply had other priorities. The author suggests that while managing your image can be useful at the start of a career, it can become a distraction from truly important work. Ultimately, Holiday argues that selflessness isn't a weakness, but a strength. Marshall's humility and dedication to the greater good had a profound impact on the world, even if he didn't seek recognition for it. He concludes with a quote from soccer coach Tony Adams: "Focus on the team, and individual recognition will follow." The lesson is clear. Prioritize the mission, play for something bigger than yourself, and you'll achieve more and become a better person in the process. Chapter 17. Meditate on the Immensity. Ryan Holiday explores how getting over yourself, your ego, can actually help you live a richer, more meaningful life. He begins with the idea that truly wise people are both separate from the world and connected to it, like a monk who understands both independence and belonging. He illustrates this with the story of John Muir, a naturalist who felt deeply connected to everything around him while exploring Alaska. Muir experienced a sense of unity with nature, realizing how all living things work together. This feeling, Holiday explains, is similar to what ancient thinkers called sympatheia, or a feeling of being part of something much bigger than yourself. Holiday argues that our egos often get in the way of experiencing this connection. When we're focused on success, money, or being important, we lose sight of the bigger picture. We start believing that our worth comes from what we do instead of simply being. This leads to feeling empty, stressed, and stuck, like running on a treadmill that never stops. The author suggests a simple exercise to break free from this. Visit a place filled with history, like an old battlefield. Seeing the remnants of past lives can make you realize how small you are in the grand scheme of things, and how much life has continued before and will continue after you. Holiday points out that recognizing our place in history isn't about feeling insignificant, but about understanding our connection to everyone who came before us. We are, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, a quotation from all our ancestors. We carry their stories and experiences within us. This perspective can be incredibly empowering. The author uses the example of astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, who believes we can feel both small and significant at the same time, small in the vastness of the universe, but big because we are a part of it. Great thinkers and leaders throughout history often sought out solitude in nature to gain this perspective, Holiday notes. By stepping away from the noise and distractions of daily life, they could hear their own inner voice and find inspiration. He emphasizes that creativity isn't about being brilliant, but about being open to new ideas. This openness is impossible when you're convinced the world revolves around you. To illustrate how easily we forget our place in time, Holiday shares fascinating historical tidbits. He reminds us that Cleopatra lived closer to today than to the building of the pyramids, and that debts incurred centuries ago were only recently paid off by the British government. These examples show how the past is always present, and how we are all connected across generations. He playfully references Muhammad Ali's famous boast about his greatness, suggesting that even the most accomplished people need to actively fight against ego. Ultimately, Holiday encourages readers to actively seek out experiences that remind them of the immensity of the world. He quotes William Blake's poem about finding eternity in a single hour, suggesting that we can experience a sense of the infinite in the simplest things. He urges us to embrace vulnerability, to let go of the need to control everything, and to reconnect with the world around us. By doing so, we can find peace, purpose, and a deeper understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe. Chapter 18. Maintain your sobriety. Ryan Holiday presents a compelling argument for the power of sobriety, not from substances, but from ego, as a key to lasting success and a fulfilling life. He introduces Angela Merkel as a fascinating example, pointing out how her lack of flashiness and focus on practicality have made her a remarkably effective leader. Unlike many politicians driven by a need for attention or power, Merkel remains grounded and clear-headed, making decisions based on what's best for the situation, not what boosts her image. Holiday explains that we often mistakenly believe success comes from boundless energy and a big personality. While enthusiasm is helpful, relying solely on ego is unsustainable. Ego creates a false sense of invincibility, leading to reckless decisions and ultimately burnout. He uses the fable of the tortoise and the hare to illustrate this point. Steady, consistent effort, like Merkel's slow but deliberate rise to power, is far more effective in the long run than a quick burst of energy. The author highlights how ego can cloud judgment, causing us to escalate conflicts instead of resolving them. Merkel's calm response to Vladimir Putin's attempt to intimidate her with his dog demonstrates this perfectly. She didn't react with anger or defensiveness, but remained composed, turning the situation to her advantage. This illustrates that true strength lies in self-control and a focus on principles, not in impulsive reactions. Holiday draws a parallel to the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who actively fought against the corrupting influence of power. Aurelius understood that maintaining a clear mind and staying true to one's values was essential for effective leadership. This idea is echoed in a Zen practice where a master repeatedly reminds himself to become sober, guarding against deception and self-importance. Holiday suggests we should do the same, resisting the temptation to be swayed by praise or material possessions. The author emphasizes that power itself can be damaging, fragmenting our focus and limiting our options. Ego exacerbates this problem, making it harder to make rational decisions. He contrasts this with Merkel's approach, which prioritizes results over image. Like a skilled coach who focuses on the steak rather than the sizzle, Merkel understands that substance is what truly matters. Holiday argues that today's complex world demands leaders who are rational, analytical, and objective. A clear head is essential for navigating the constant flow of information and change. He concludes by noting that many successful people intentionally live modest lives, avoiding the trappings of fame and fortune precisely because it helps them stay grounded and focused on what truly matters. This sobriety is not about denying oneself enjoyment, but about resisting the temptations that can derail our progress and compromise our integrity. Chapter 19. For what often comes next, ego is the enemy. Ryan Holiday begins by pointing out that reaching the top of your game isn't what people expect. It doesn't get easier. It gets harder because you have to control yourself to stay successful. He uses the example of Alexander the Great, a brilliant leader who conquered a huge empire, but whose ego ultimately led to his downfall and early death. Alexander wanted more and more and didn't know when to stop. Holiday explains that the ancient philosopher Aristotle understood this problem. Aristotle believed in finding the golden mean, which is a balance between two extremes. For example, being brave is good, but too much bravery becomes recklessness. Being generous is good, but too much generosity can lead to wasting money. Finding that perfect balance is tough, but it's key to being truly excellent. It's not enough to just push hard or to do nothing at all. You need to apply the right effort at the right time. The author warns against the undisciplined pursuit of more, meaning constantly chasing bigger and better things without a clear purpose. He also cautions against becoming complacent or too comfortable after achieving success. He illustrates this with the stories of Napoleon and Howard Hughes. Both men achieved great fame, but were ultimately unhappy. Napoleon realized his accomplishments didn't really change the world, and Hughes, despite appearing to have it all, wished he could trade places with someone else. Holiday emphasizes that true happiness isn't found in fame or possessions, but in staying grounded and connected to what truly matters, things like staying healthy, being honest, and helping others. He acknowledges that life will inevitably throw challenges our way, like higher taxes or unfair criticism. Instead of pretending these things won't happen, we should prepare for them. The author points out that success doesn't guarantee continued success. Things change, and what worked before might not work again. Setbacks and failures are a natural part of life. Holiday encourages readers to accept this reality and focus on managing themselves, rather than trying to control everything around them. Ultimately, being prepared for tough times and keeping your ego in check are the best ways to navigate life's ups and downs. Chapter 20. Alive Time or Dead Time. Ryan Holiday begins by telling the story of Malcolm X, once known as Detroit Red, a criminal who ended up in prison for armed robbery. While Malcolm X deserved his punishment, Holiday points out that prison time presented a crucial choice. Would it be wasted, or would it be used for growth? This idea, borrowed from Robert Greene, is the core of alive time or dead time. Dead time is when we passively wait, while alive time is when we actively learn and improve. Holiday explains that everyone faces periods of dead time, situations we didn't choose, like a boring class, a waiting period, or even a difficult setback. Our natural reaction is often to feel frustrated and want things to be different. However, the author argues that this is a short-sighted approach. Instead of dwelling on what we want, we should focus on what we can do with the time we have. Malcolm X's transformation in prison is a powerful example. He didn't complain or plot revenge. He used his time to educate himself, teaching himself to read and devouring books on history, philosophy, and religion. He turned a negative situation into an opportunity for self-improvement, ultimately becoming a powerful voice for change. Holiday notes that many great thinkers and creators have found inspiration and productivity during times of constraint, like Francis Scott Key writing the national anthem while held on a ship, or Ian Fleming creating Chitty Chitty Bang Bang while on bed rest. The author emphasizes that dead time isn't just about being lazy. It's about letting our ego control us. When we're driven by ego, we might waste time dreaming of revenge, distracting ourselves, or refusing to take responsibility for our actions. True growth happens when we let go of ego and embrace the opportunity to learn and improve, even in difficult circumstances. Holiday illustrates that accepting a situation doesn't mean liking it, but it means choosing to make the most of it. He uses the analogy of casting down your bucket where you are, a quote from Booker T. Washington, meaning to utilize the resources and opportunities available in your current situation, no matter how undesirable it may seem. Ultimately, Holiday encourages readers to recognize that while we can't control everything that happens to us, we always have control over how we respond. We can choose to let difficult times define us, or we can use them to become better versions of ourselves. Chapter 21, The Effort is Enough. Ryan Holiday introduces us to Belisarius, a brilliant general from ancient Rome who saved his empire multiple times, yet was treated terribly by his emperor. Despite winning major battles and rescuing the throne, Belisarius faced suspicion, unfair accusations, and ultimately poverty. What's remarkable, Holiday points out, is that Belisarius didn't complain. He simply focused on doing his job to the best of his ability, finding satisfaction in the effort itself, not in praise or rewards. Holiday explains that many people tie their happiness to how others react to their work. If someone puts a lot of effort into a project, writing a book, starting a business, they often want recognition and success. But the author warns that once something is finished, it's out of your control. Others decide if it's good or not, and you can't force them to appreciate it. Belisarius understood this. He could control his actions, but not the emperor's response. The author argues that a strong ego can be harmful. If you need constant approval, you'll be disappointed when it doesn't come. It's like building your happiness on shaky ground. Holiday uses the story of Alexander the Great and the philosopher Diogenes to illustrate this. Alexander offered to grant Diogenes anything, but Diogenes simply asked him to move so he wasn't blocking the sun. This showed Alexander that true contentment doesn't come from power or possessions, but from inner peace. Holiday emphasizes that life is full of situations where hard work doesn't guarantee a positive outcome. Activists might struggle to change things, inventors might create things nobody wants, and leaders might be stopped before they finish their work. The author reminds us that even considering giving up because of potential disappointment is a sign of ego. It's better to find satisfaction in the work itself, rather than relying on external rewards. The author suggests changing how we define success. Instead of measuring it by awards or praise, we should focus on whether we gave our best effort. This idea echoes the advice of basketball coach John Wooden, who believed success is peace of mind that comes from knowing you tried your hardest. Holiday also quotes Marcus Aurelius, who said true peace comes from controlling your own actions, not worrying about what others think. Holiday shares the tragic story of John Kennedy Toole, the author of A Confederacy of Dunces. Toole's book was rejected by publishers, leading to his despair and eventual suicide. The book later won a Pulitzer Prize, but Toole wasn't around to enjoy the recognition. This example shows how unfair and unpredictable life can be, and why it's crucial to find value in the work itself, regardless of the outcome. The author concludes that the world doesn't care about our desires, and trying to control external factors will only lead to frustration. True fulfillment comes from doing good work and letting go of the need for approval. Chapter 22, Fight Club Moments. Ryan Holiday explores the idea that big changes in life often come after really tough times, moments he calls Fight Club moments. He argues that we often build up a false sense of self, filled with things we think make us happy, but really just distract us from what's important. This can lead to bad choices and a life that doesn't feel right. It's like piling up stuff until something has to give. The author explains that we rarely change unless something shakes us up. Sometimes this shake-up comes from outside, like a harsh criticism from a boss or a painful breakup. Other times, we create the shake-up ourselves, like the character in Fight Club who destroys his own possessions. These moments are uncomfortable because they force us to confront truths about ourselves that we've been avoiding. They expose our weaknesses and flaws. Holiday points out that our ego, our sense of self-importance, often gets in the way of growth. When we're challenged, our ego doesn't want to admit we're wrong. It wants to protect our image, even if that means making things worse. He uses the example of Lance Armstrong, who continued to deny cheating even when faced with overwhelming evidence, damaging his reputation and the lives of others. This is because admitting fault would have been a blow to his ego. The author suggests that these difficult experiences, while painful, can be opportunities for real progress. He draws on the idea of katabasis from Greek mythology, a descent into darkness that leads to greater understanding. It's like hitting rock bottom, but then finding the strength to climb back up, wiser and stronger. He uses the example of J.K. Rowling, who faced homelessness and a failed marriage before becoming a successful author. Holiday emphasizes that facing these moments isn't easy. It requires honesty and a willingness to let go of our ego. He references 12-step programs, which focus on stripping away false beliefs and baggage to reveal our true selves. It's about accepting criticism, even when it's harsh, and using it to improve. He quotes Hemingway, who wrote that people are strong at the broken places, meaning that we often grow the most from our failures. Ultimately, Ryan Holiday argues that avoiding these Fight Club moments isn't possible, and trying to do so only delays the inevitable. He believes that embracing the discomfort and learning from our mistakes is the key to a more fulfilling life. He concludes by suggesting that looking back on these tough times with a sense of gratitude can be a powerful reminder of how far we've come. It's about recognizing the struggle and appreciating the journey. Chapter 23, Draw the Line. Ryan Holiday explores how our ego can actually ruin our lives, even when simple mistakes happen. He uses the story of John DeLorean, the car maker, as a prime example. DeLorean's company was failing because of his poor leadership, but instead of admitting fault, he tried a risky and illegal plan, a huge drug deal, to save it. This made things much, much worse, showing how ego can drive someone to dig themselves into a deeper hole. Holiday points out that it's okay to make mistakes. Everyone does. The real problem starts when we tie our self-worth to our work and fear that failure means we are bad people. The author explains that when things go wrong, our ego jumps in and asks, "Why is this happening to me?" instead of, "What can I learn from this?" This fear of looking weak leads to desperate, often bad decisions. Holiday contrasts DeLorean with Steve Jobs, who also faced a major setback, being fired from Apple. Jobs was upset, but he didn't double down on bad behavior. He started new companies, Pixar being a huge success, and learned from his past mistakes. This shows that facing failure with humility and a willingness to improve can lead to even greater achievements. Holiday further illustrates this point with the example of Dov Charney, the founder of American Apparel. When faced with losing control of his company, Charney didn't accept a reasonable compromise. Instead, he fought aggressively, leading to lawsuits, financial ruin, and ultimately bankruptcy. The author draws a parallel to Alcibiades, a historical figure who repeatedly switched sides in war, always trying to save himself, but ultimately causing more harm. These stories demonstrate a pattern. Ego-driven reactions escalate problems instead of solving them. According to Holiday, the key is recognizing when to stop. He uses the analogy of a boxer who needs to know when to tap out to avoid serious injury. It's not about giving up entirely, but about understanding that sometimes the best course of action is to reassess, learn, and start again. He references Alexander Hamilton's advice to a friend in trouble: if a situation is hopeless, don't make it worse. Holiday emphasizes that failure is a part of life. Everyone experiences setbacks, from athletes getting cut from teams to authors facing rejection. The difference between those who recover and those who don't lies in how they respond. A healthy ego understands that success and failure are temporary states, not reflections of personal worth. Instead of desperately clinging to a failing situation, the author suggests focusing on rebuilding and returning to fundamental principles. He concludes by saying that trying to avoid failure at all costs often leads to even bigger failures, and that true failure is abandoning your values. Chapter 24, Maintain Your Own Scorecard. Ryan Holiday explores how focusing too much on winning or getting praise can actually hold us back from truly improving. He uses the story of the New England Patriots and Tom Brady as a prime example. Even though the Patriots got an amazing player with a late draft pick, they weren't thrilled with how it happened. They realized their scouting hadn't been good enough, and that luck played a bigger role than skill in finding Brady. Instead of celebrating, they used this as a lesson to become even better at evaluating talent. Holiday explains that truly successful people don't measure themselves by outside achievements like Super Bowl rings or awards. They have a personal scorecard based on their own standards and potential. Coach John Wooden and athlete Bo Jackson are examples of people who weren't satisfied with just winning. They wanted to perform flawlessly. This internal focus isn't about being hard on yourself, but about constantly striving for improvement. It's about asking, did I do my absolute best? Instead of, did I win? The author points out that ego gets in the way of growth. Ego loves praise and avoids criticism, so it prevents us from seeing our weaknesses. It's like wearing blinders that only show us what we're already good at. This can lead to short-term success, but rarely lasting achievement. Holiday uses the idea of an indifferent spectator, imagining how a neutral person would judge your actions, as a way to overcome ego. This helps us be honest with ourselves and identify areas where we can improve. Holiday argues that a strong ego often leads to cutting corners or justifying bad behavior. People might say something isn't technically illegal, or no one will know to excuse their actions. By holding ourselves to higher standards, we're less likely to compromise our values. This approach isn't always easy, but it leads to greater resilience and a more fulfilling life. It means being okay with setbacks because you know you're focused on becoming the best version of yourself, not just on external validation. Ultimately, Holiday suggests that true progress comes from discipline and a commitment to continuous improvement, not from chasing applause. When we focus on our inner standards, we become less selfish, more team-oriented, and better equipped to handle challenges. Reflecting on past successes doesn't help us grow. It's the pursuit of improvement that truly matters. By challenging our ego and setting higher expectations for ourselves, we unlock our potential and live more meaningful lives. Chapter 25, Always Love. Ryan Holiday begins by pointing out a surprising truth. Getting angry or holding onto bitterness rarely helps us. He uses a quote from an ancient writer, Euripides, who questioned why anyone would bother being angry with a world that wouldn't even notice. This idea sets the stage for the entire chapter, which explores how our ego can actually hold us back from a happier, more successful life. The author illustrates this with the story of Orson Welles and William Randolph Hearst. Welles, a young filmmaker, created a movie that Hearst believed was about him, and Hearst launched a huge campaign to destroy it. Interestingly, Hearst likely hadn't even seen the film, and the movie wasn't solely about him anyway. Holiday explains this is a classic example of the Streisand effect. When trying to suppress something only makes it more famous. Hearst's intense reaction, driven by ego and a need to control his image, ironically made him look worse and ensured the movie's lasting impact. Holiday argues that this pattern repeats itself constantly. When we focus on protecting our reputation or getting revenge, we waste energy and often make things worse. He uses the example of Richard Nixon, who, even after a landslide re-election, couldn't stop himself from fighting perceived slights, ultimately leading to his downfall. The author suggests that instead of reacting with anger, a better approach is to simply let things go or even respond with kindness. He shares an inspiring story about Frederick Douglass, a former slave who was forced to ride in a segregated train car. When a white supporter apologized, Douglass didn't accept the apology or express anger. He declared that no one could diminish his inner self. This demonstrates a powerful mindset, refusing to let others define your worth. Holiday highlights leaders like Barbara Jordan and Martin Luther King Jr., who preach the power of love over hate, seeing hate as a destructive force. Holiday challenges readers to think about what makes them angry and whether those feelings are actually helping them. He points out that the negative traits we dislike in others often lead to their own downfall anyway. Why waste energy being miserable when others are already heading down a bad path? He uses the example of Kirk Hammett, a musician who carried a grudge for years after joining Metallica, a band that replaced another guitarist. This resentment consumed him and nearly destroyed his life, despite his success. The author concludes by emphasizing that love, or at least letting go of negativity, is a more productive path. He contrasts this with the destructive cycle of ego and anger, which can tarnish legacies and prevent us from living fulfilling lives. Like Orson Welles, who refused to be defined by Hearst's attacks, we can choose to focus on our own growth and happiness instead of getting caught up in the drama of others. Ultimately, Holiday suggests that a peaceful, open-minded approach is not only better for our well-being, but also more effective in the long run. Chapter 26, For Everything That Comes Next, Ego is the Enemy. Ryan Holiday begins by reminding us that everyone faces tough times, and that's okay. He uses examples like Winston Churchill, who was often alone in his beliefs, and Katharine Graham, who led her family's newspaper through difficult changes. These people didn't give up, and neither should we. Holiday points out that failure is a part of life. Like Benjamin Franklin said, sometimes you get the bad with the good. But he suggests failure can actually be helpful. It's often through mistakes that we truly learn and grow, as Harold Jennings observed. The author explains that life is a cycle of trying, succeeding, facing new challenges, and trying again. It's a continuous loop. When things go wrong, it naturally feels awful. But Holiday emphasizes that ego is what makes things truly difficult and can even cause lasting failure. He believes that self-awareness is the key to overcoming obstacles. Great leaders throughout history have all stumbled, but they learned from those experiences and became stronger. They realized they weren't perfect and that things wouldn't always go their way. Holiday stresses that the goal isn't to avoid challenges or success, but to approach them without letting ego get in the way. Ego can cloud our judgment and prevent us from learning. Instead, we should strive for success that doesn't inflate our pride and face failure with resilience, not defensiveness. The author's central message is simple. Don't let your ego drive your ambitions, your reactions to success, or your response to setbacks. It's a constant practice, and it's not easy, but it's essential for growth and a fulfilling life. Ultimately, Holiday encourages readers to use every experience, good or bad, as a chance to understand themselves better and become wiser. And that brings us to the end of our summary of this book. I hope you found it insightful and valuable. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe for more. Your support helps us bring you more great content. Thanks for watching.